Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in person, and thank you for those of you joining on Zoom. I'm excited to call the first curriculum committee meeting to order, and we will start out with election of officers. So may I have a motion to elect a chair to the curriculum committee? Julie?
I nominate Sarah.
Is there a second for the nomination of Sarah Parent? Tara Worm. Are there any other nominations? All in favor of Sarah Parent to be chair of the curriculum committee? That is unanimous. Congratulations, Sarah, you're chair of the curriculum committee.
Thank you, Mr. Denise.
All right.
So first, thank you all for your vote of confidence in me. Darion's curriculum is one of the strongest in the state, if not the nation, that we have a lot to be proud of. And I look forward to leading us in discussions about our curriculum and how do we ensure the best education for all of Darion's learners going forward. Our first agenda item is a discussion of the committee charge. So the Board of Education asked you. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, sorry. So the Board of Education asked to establish this committee, and now it's our job to focus our work and our priorities. And in the effort for efficiency, I sent around a draft of a charge. So my hope is that we can use this to start thinking about what this committee should do and maybe even what this committee should not do. So the hope is that we come to consensus and then we bring it to the full board for further discussion and input from the rest of our board. Some members of the committee have asked to make sure that whatever we come up with stands within state statute. We will make sure that that happens. I did ask Nadine if there was a written charge from any prior Board of Education committee, and she could not find anything. She looked back through to 2005, excuse me. And then I looked through and found some committee charges from other districts across the state and across the nation. And thanks to Jill McCammon as well, who sent me a few. So I printed out a bunch of those if anybody would like to look at them. But I will just open the discussion about, actually, you know what, maybe I should read the draft since the people don't have it. So I'll do that. I'll take that. So it reads, my first draft. As requested by the Board of Education, the Curriculum Committee will work with the administration to review the curriculum of the Darien Public Schools to ensure the best education for all students. Responsibilities of this committee may include reviewing new curricula and courses, reviewing new instructional programs and textbooks, reviewing current curriculum and curriculum updates, reviewing data to determine curriculum effectiveness and student growth, and ensuring policy alignment. Approving curriculum is the responsibility of the full Board of Education. The Curriculum Committee will provide recommendations to the board as appropriate. So I'll just open that up to discussion. First thoughts? Sorry, I can't see you.
So my only question would be to the administration to identify. Oh, sorry. To identify or clarify for board members, new and older, who have worked with curriculum, the difference between a curriculum and a resource. Because there is a difference there, and curriculum sometimes gets used as a big word.
Sure.
But I think that would be helpful going forward. What's a resource, what's curriculum, and where the board's role is inside of that.
Sure. Go ahead.
You don't have to have an answer right
Oh, we
now
do?
if you want. If you do.
Sure.
Okay.
So in September, when I did the curriculum update, I talked about primary instructional resources and secondary instructional resources, where textbooks are often, most of the time, primary instructional resources. They are a primary instructional resource when it is the guaranteed book that every student will receive to take that class. So anything that's a guaranteed experience might be a resource, it might be a textbook. And the reason I'm saying resource is it might be like a web-based platform. So text, not only here, but in the Common Core standards, defines, it means that it's media, it means it's anything that's guaranteed. So that's when I'm saying primary, talk about the guaranteed versus supplemental based on teacher discretion.
Other, Tara, Mrs. Worm, sorry. Too many
We're gonna
tears.
have to keep that.
So, okay, so you mentioned primary, so then what is the secondary resources? What's in that bucket?
So I think what secondary resources could be anything that's happening in real time, like anything that's happening in the news media, a newspaper, a professional journal, things that are being published on a regular basis. Those are relevant and something that a teacher might choose to use to enhance instruction on any given day. It doesn't mean every single teacher is going to use it, but teachers create individual lesson plans based on the curriculum. So it's what they are bringing to the table to provide the best instruction they can for students.
And are there parameters surrounding that?
I would say that the clear parameters that surround them is the code of ethics for educators. So there are there's ethics, but we trust in their professional judgment that they're going to make selections based on what's appropriate for students.
Ms. Acker?
So my question's a little bit different and broader, and that's why we might not have an answer for today. In terms of board work and board approval, as we're looking at a charge, what I want to make clear is when board is approving or we are recommending to the board curriculum versus individual resources. And sometimes on primary, we are approving because it is the curriculum we're bringing into the district. But other time there are resources that the board would not vote. So we've heard presentations on this before, but in years past. So I just think that will be helpful to this committee to know that we might not approve every single news article used in a class. However, if we're looking at bringing in a whole new program and that includes textbooks, that might be something we would see here. So as we form our discussions, I think there needs to be kind of some buckets to understand that secondary resources the board might not see. Primary resources we might not see unless there's a major change in curriculum. So that's the resource curriculum distinction that I would be looking to draw. And it might be too drawn out for now, but given that we say we review new instructional programs and textbooks, I don't want to be too broad in that understanding. There might be times where we might not review every resource.
And I'll just make a connection. The current policy 6610 is the board has given permission to the administration to approve textbooks in the current policy. So if that's going to change, it would need to be a policy change as well. And my recommendation as an administrator would be, if that is what the board chooses to do, it would be for the primary things. What are the guaranteed textbooks that all students will use?
So as we're looking at the charge, that's the only bulletproof on the charge that I think we may need to draft slightly more carefully so that we are within policy. That's what I was.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important distinction. Do you have a suggestion as to how that should be worded differently? I mean, do you just want to drop textbooks or?
You mean pre-coffee? I would drop textbooks at the moment because we have a policy that dictates textbooks.
Right.
And that to the public listening, that doesn't mean that textbooks aren't reviewed. It doesn't mean that textbooks don't go through a rigorous process and aren't presented at the board level. But I don't want to set up a dichotomy between our policy and this charge, given that this charge at the moment is a very good amalgamation of ideas, but that's what it is.
Mr. Denny? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask, other than the distinction we just discussed, is there anything else in here that is any different than what has been the practice of this board and administration? Other than I know we haven't been operating with a curriculum committee for the last few years, but all of this same work has been the responsibility of the board and administration as described here.
Correct.
That's
Other than that one word.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's been the work that's been done.
Mr. Denny?
I got in this conversation the other day with Chris, I think, do we need to make a distinction between, this is a good conversation, the policy is approving textbooks. My thought is when you go through the process of reviewing, looking at and improving curriculum or a new course, when the textbook is included in that, when we approve that new curriculum or that new course, is it apparent that we're approving the textbook, or is that a separate approval, the textbook over and above the course that we're approving, the way the policy?
No, the policy reads that we have delegated that to the professionals.
Okay.
So the way we've been doing it is correct. The only difference I'm drawing is that because we say we do something here, I don't want to be in violation of our policy. So I actually think we're doing it fine. This is just like a semantical
Right.
thing. And it's not as if anyone remembers when we brought math and focus into the district, or we brought Singapore math at some point, we reviewed those resources. So it's not as if the board is not reviewing, but this curriculum committee nor the Board of Ed is going out and finding the textbook. I think we rightfully so have delegated that to people who do this all the time and actually know what they're saying. So it's not as if we don't have eyes on. But I just don't want our charge. I was just getting at, I don't want our charge to be in violation of the policy.
Policy. No, I understand that. I do want to underscore both the point that you made and Mrs. Best made, that the board has been doing this work even though we have not had this curriculum subcommittee, that the board has had oversight over the curriculum. So, just those who are out there who may be new to, watching our meetings, whenever, we're not creating this charge to create new work for everybody. This was already work that we're doing. We're just defining it.
And I only bring it up because it's a draft. And so we
Yes.
were asked to review the
Yes,
draft. So
absolutely.
that's the only change
So-
that I would make. No.
Oh, sorry, Jill, Ms. McCammon.
I think it's probably, the committee should probably pull up the policy and take a look, because it does mention the curriculum committee being a part of the process. It says approving instructional materials is delegated to the administration and designated curriculum committee.
So let's go back to my original point. I just want to make sure that policy 661 and this charge are not in competition with each other. So that's why I asked about resources. We can review and then stay on task. Sorry, I have something in my eye.
Sorry, I'm just pulling up the policy. I had it up and I lost it.
What are you looking for?
The policy, just so I could read exactly what it said.
I think it aligns with how we're doing it, how we want to continue to do it, other than that.
Okay, so just so everyone, it's while the board is legally responsible for all matters relating to the adoption of textbooks and purchase of library and other supplementary materials, the responsibility for reviewing, selecting, and approving instructional materials is delegated to the administration and designated curriculum committee. Okay.
And
So
that curriculum
yeah.
committee in the past has not been this committee.
That's right.
It's been
That
the
is,
been the
that
committee
was
of
the
the whole.
district, that was the administrative committee.
Which
Yeah.
is why, as I said,
Yes.
we get presentations on things like Singapore math.
But
So
that doesn't include the secondary resources, correct?
That does not include the secondary
Okay.
resources.
Just at some point, I would like to look at what the parameters are for teachers and their secondary resources, because the issues that have come up with parents and the things that we're hearing, it hasn't been about textbooks. It hasn't been about primary resources. It has been about the secondary resources that seem to be, and it's not all teachers, it's little bits and pieces here and there.
Right.
So, and that doesn't make, anyone right or wrong. It just seems to be that there's no guidelines, right? At least that's how it looks from the outside. So, I think there needs to be looked at, where are we finding secondary resources? Is there guidelines for teachers, what they can or cannot use, or what they should or shouldn't use, ages that are appropriate, things like that.
So that's something that we could put on a future agenda, is how, how that process goes.
but can I just ask?
There are some good guidelines in the policy around that,
Yes.
Yeah.
in terms of other resources and materials.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so if we cross off and textbooks, are we good with presenting this to the full board?
Yes.
Yes, Julie, you good with that? Okay. Moving on. Thank you all for your work on that. So the next agenda item is an overview of the curriculum infrastructure. And I think, that this will help kind of a back to basics for those we have new board members, we have a new subcommittee, and we have new community interest in curriculum. So hopefully, Mr. Tramberg, you can help us understand the curriculum and how it works.
Great, good morning again, everyone. So curriculum infrastructure, I broke it up into two pieces. First, the curriculum leadership, so who are the people, and then the development cycle or the processes that go into place. And there's, I'll try to bridge this part into the next agenda item, if that's okay. That's EduPlanet 21. So it's a separate item, but it's going to support the rest of the presentation. Despite being a musician, I love a good visual. And so this is the best visual we could come up with in the time. It's kind of like a Cadbury egg of curriculum, is how I've come to know it. So the outer rings are, what are the larger organizational pieces that inform the curriculum writ large. So our professional development and evaluation committee, that is the group that oversees all of the teacher learning and teacher evaluation feedback systems for the district. That's made up of teachers and administrators. And it's co-chaired with the Director of Human Resources, myself, and the president of the DEA. We also have the ring of the BOE Curriculum Committee, which is now this group, and I think it also represents the BOE as a whole. And then the orange ring is district teaching and learning committees, which include our district curriculum leadership team, our elementary leadership team, which is our elementary administrators, our secondary leadership team, our secondary administrators. And we also have kind of like pop-up collaborative action teams. So when we have a need to address something and look closely, those teams will come up, and also our tech council would fit in this category as well. So who is always regularly systemically looking at that process. In the ring are the players, who are the people that have a role in shaping, revising, creating curriculum across the district. This is not a hierarchy, so the arrows going up and down are just showing how the interconnectedness of those groups. The only hierarchical thing I would say is I'm the final decision maker when it comes to curriculum before we get presented to the superintendent or any of the board committees. So we have a group of department directors and chairs, and I know that the font is small, but that ranges from our director of elementary education to all of our secondary department chairs. Those are administrative positions in the district who provide very specific oversight to the content areas that they represent. And then we have at the elementary level, grade level leaders. And the corresponding part to grade level leaders really becomes a curriculum council, which includes teachers from the different departments that represent the voice of where curriculum is going for their departments. Then we have team leaders at the middle school. And then we have those area coordinator positions, which are teacher leader positions. Some of them have release time, some of them don't. So Art K-12, as an example, we have our elementary curriculum coordinator, Spanish K-5, which does not have release time. So each of those are unique positions that were created to support a specific need. And then the people that have the biggest role in actually creating curriculum is the teachers. So every summer when we're doing curriculum work, that is a team of teachers.
Listen to a meeting.
To work with a group of.
John, you need to mute, please. Oh, there you go.
So it's teachers working with their colleagues who teach that course or that grade level. And then they're working with administrators through an approval process. So those are all of the players and the influences, the orbit of the Cadbury curriculum egg is how that information is disseminated. Is this a helpful graphic or not?
No, I think it's helpful. Do you want to stop and see if anyone has questions about
That would be great.
this? Okay.
Yes.
Any questions about that? My only question is, it seems like there are a lot of players, and it seems that how does, you know, how does it get streamlined enough so it's efficient?
So I will talk about that in a couple slides.
Okay.
That's a great question. This is a repeat slide that I know you've seen many times. It's just an important slide because Darien is unique in their approach to curriculum and it being a responsive curriculum. And why it's unique is most places will have a curriculum development cycle where every 4 years, English goes under a microscope and we're going to redo and really look hard at our English program. And the next year's math, and the next year might be social studies and world language. So we are doing that all the time. So it's a flexible and adaptive approach because things often change faster than every 4 years. So the way that the district has approached this is when it's time, because the forces determine that it changes, that's when we make the change. We don't wait and say, all right, math, we know something new about math instruction that we didn't know last year, but now we have to wait 4 more years before we can actually address it. That's not been the approach. So these are the attributes of a responsive curriculum. You won't see much written about this because it's not common. There aren't other places that do it as specifically and as with as much intent as we do here. So I think that's something to be proud of. And at the same time, I think we also have to be thoughtful of an audit process to make sure things aren't passing by through a responsive process, right? So there's 2 sides to that. If you're not saying, I'm going to pause and look really hard at this, that could be problematic too. So there's some things that I think we can do to improve those processes as well. In the upper right-hand corner of this graphic, that was the graphic I used to talk about some of the drivers of curriculum in the September presentation to the full board. I thought I would just break those down a little bit more because we didn't talk too much about it then. And the first and the most important are the standards and frameworks, because those are not things that we are making up locally. Those are whether it's standards or frameworks, those are the research-based skills and content that we need to work on with students in order for them to be successful in that specific area. And when it comes to places like math and literacy, there's high stakes testing that goes with that. With science and NGSS, there's high stakes testing that goes with that. Social studies they have their framework, and they're also working on some, I will call them standards to go on top of our framework, which is going to be more content focused because the framework right now is probably a little bit more skills focused. So that will be the change I would say is coming in the next year or two. The next piece would be the vision of the graduate. So that's the exemplar of what a DPS student embodies by the time that they graduate. And I'll talk about this more with EduPlanet 21. This is not a high school initiative. It's not a high school process. It's if we want students to embody some type of attribute, that means it's our work for the 13 years that we have them if they're with us for all of that time. And the last part is the strategic plan, which are the goals that are adopted, and they are changing and evolving as appropriate. Sarah, this gets back to your question before. So this is the cycle itself. The revision plan comes in the spring and in the fall. So in the fall, which is a challenge because we just finished curriculum revision from the summer work, and then the budget process starts in the fall for our department and our area leaders. And one of the questions I asked them is, what's going to be the next thing you have to look at before the revisions that they already made have gone into place? So that's when it's a projection. And then as the year's going, they're looking mostly at the formative assessments or the assessments that are created with each of those courses and grade levels to determine what's working well, what might we need to adjust. And so then in the spring, we develop the actual allocation of where do we really need to spend time in those hours. And once we decide, okay, what are the areas, then we look at who are the teams going to be that are going to do that work. The circle that I have in red, those 4 stages that I just blew up over there, that's what's happening during that time. This is the actual revision and creation. And that often starts with a scope and sequence and a pacing guide. So a scope and sequence just looks at what are the big ideas, the knowledge and skills, a very high level look of what we want to cover. And the pacing guide is, okay, what's our window of time that we're going to accomplish this? And again, that's often driven by the data and how students did in the previous year. And then we break down the actual unit. So this is the UBD framework. So stage 1 is knowledge and skills. This is often an area where you probably don't need to do too much revision because the standards don't change. The standards aren't evolving on a regular basis. So as long as we've prioritized the right standards, and when I say prioritize, that just means which did we select as the focus area for a unit, because there are more standards than we can ever teach. I'm sure you've heard a lot about if we taught all of the standards the way that we were supposed to, we would need to be in school for like 14 hours a day and 250 days a year, which is just not possible. Stage 2 is the assessment. So how do we know that students did what the unit was designed to do? And where we spend most of the time in the curriculum revision process when it's not a new class is more like on stage 3. What was the learning plan? What worked, didn't work? What do we need to change? Did that get at your question well enough?
Yeah. Questions on this?
And this leads into EduPlanet, and EduPlanet 21, you'll see that actually doesn't appear in RC19 because it's a technology platform. It's a warehousing system that is, it's unique in that it is the only warehousing that is UBD specific. And there's a little crosswalk here between EduPlanet 21 and Google Drive. The biggest advantage of Google Drive is obviously there's no cost. But I'll say the biggest piece that's missing from having a Google platform curriculum to having the software is it crosswalks all the standards across levels, across content areas. And it it requires that you align assessments within every unit to the standards. So if you design in stage one, you're saying these are the standards we want to cover, but then you have an assessment in stage two and you're not assessing the standard, it's going to tell you that. They'll say you have a misalignment in what you've designed. And it also looks over the course itself. So it's going to say you must really love standard two because you covered standard two in every single unit, but you never covered standard four the whole year. So it does all of these checks for you. It also gives the opportunity for not only the content standards for a specific course, but also you can add things like the ISTE technology standards. You can customize and we can add our attributes of the vision of the graduate. So we can show where are we intentionally doing this work along the way. And then you can crosswalk across all grade levels, all content areas and say, we never did this, or we're only doing this in social studies. And that's something we should really be doing in science. There's lots of built-in metrics that are incredibly helpful. And it's a change in where the information goes, but it's not a change in our approach and our belief that backwards design and understanding by design is the most robust and rigorous way to design curriculum units of study. And I have an example of what a unit will look like on the parent-facing side, if you want to see that now, or if you'd like to.
That was one of my questions, is how do parents see this? Yeah.
So does that mean Google goes away? And therefore all papers and things like that are no longer written in like Google Docs?
So EduPlanet 21 completely interfaces with Google. So teachers are still doing all of their work with Google. Students are doing all their work with Google. This is where the curriculum lives, the written curriculum itself.
Okay.
And this is where a teacher would go to access curriculum. It's where a teacher would go to access the guaranteed assessments that come with the unit. So no matter who teaches the class, the grade level, those assessments live in EduPlanet 21. It's the guarantee.
Okay.
And is this back to our secondary resources? Do the secondary resources live in here as well?
They may, if it's a bank of things that teachers are choosing from. So in some ways, yes. And I'm never intending to not be clear about this. It's just such a complex thing that I know there's a desire for it to be super clear. So at times there's a bank of secondary resources. Here are 8 things. You might choose 2 of them to get to this teaching point. So that's an example of a secondary resource. Another might be, there was a major event that happened in the world last night. I'm going to go to a resource and say, hey, we need to watch this clip because it's our responsibility as educators to make sure we're providing the space for students to talk about this and process it. So that it might not always be.
Great, thank you.
I'll show you what. So this is shout out to our friends in Madison. Madison uses this platform. So this is an example of what the parents would see. I'll say it's also an example of the teacher's curriculum as well. So there's 3 sections of a UBD unit. The first, stage 1, is the public facing side. So I'm gonna lose, Michelle, would you mind scrolling down for me so I can just talk this through? So down the left, you'll see, well, what are the goals themselves? And that includes the standards. Then where it says transfer, this is a really important point. Curriculum is founded, UBD curriculum, it's founded on this idea of long-term transfer goals. Because the idea of why schools exist is we teach for transfer, not just learning what you're learning in the course, but how are you going to experience the world and life and new things as they come to you? How are those skills transferable outside of the course? Then we have the understandings and the essential skills, essential understandings and essential questions and enduring understandings is the technical language of UBD. If you could scroll down a bit. And then we have the knowledge and skills that are required for that course. And if you can just scroll down a little bit more. And that's the end of stage 1. So if you see that list down the left-hand side, that's a long list of standards that are included, but it also right on the bottom there, you see student growth and development, 21st century. Those are Madison's, I would say that's their current version of the vision of the graduate. So they've identified what those skills are in that unit that they're going to monitor and assess. So that would be the parent facing. And right now, well, how does that compare to what US history looks like now? We would have the topic of the unit and perhaps 3 bullets that are describing this is what happens in the unit. So this is much more detailed than we currently have. And I will say, just in case anyone's listening and nervous, it's much more detailed, but it doesn't mean it's not the work that we have it available. It's not like we're doing work and approaching curriculum in a different way.
So that was one of my questions. So this is a lot of text, and I would think it's a lot of input. How onerous is it to transfer everything into EduPlanet, and just for your team and also as an individual teacher?
No, I've lived it a few times, so I can say that the great thing is anything that's about standards, those are all preloaded. So it's a matter of clicking the standards that are identified. So that's good. Transfer goals, there tend to be goals that like a limited number of goals that exist within a course. So again, those are preloaded things. Where the work happens and what takes time is when you're doing what are those essential understandings, the essential questions and enduring understandings. Like that is the place to wrestle. What are the knowledge and skills? That's where we really have to wrestle. And in some content areas we have them, and in some we don't. So this will be a heavy lift in some places, and this will feel like, well, we already have this. This is a copy and paste from our Google Docs.
And this is K-12, right?
It's K-12, and it's a huge range. And it initially, I will say, complete transparency, it could be overwhelming at first because it's a different way to approach it. But usually when you live through one unit, there's a big change.
Mrs. Best.
Just for perspective, how many units would US history have for a year's coursework?
4 to 8, I would say, would be
Okay.
typical within a year-long course.
Okay. And then I was just going to point out, I think transfer goals is a really interesting way to understand what's happening in the classroom, or what the goals are, obviously. I think that's new language for a lot of parents, and it might be something worth putting some muscle behind to explain that better, because I think that's pretty key.
I agree 100%. And transfer goals are often, if people are going to skip a step in curriculum development, guess what they skip? They skip transfer goals. And that's the end goal. If you don't have transfer goals articulated, the rest of the why becomes very focused on, you have to cover this, 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 and this. But if you have transfer goals, you're always saying, well, why do we do that? What are we hoping students can do as a result? Those are the self-check for the people that are creating the curriculum.
It's a great way to frame things.
Mrs. Aquin.
So, and I assume we'll talk more about this during the budget season, this whole program, but how does this interface then with the responsive curriculum? So if we have this up and this is the resource parents go to, can you speak to the intersection of a responsive type of curriculum?
So the good thing is everything's web-based and it's live. So for teachers, we can change it in real time if we need to change it. The good thing about curriculum is we're not just changing it on the fly. Any changes that would happen, we would make the change in EduPlanet 21, and then you just upload a PDF to the website. So we'd be able to do that with relative ease, but I'm not sure I'm answering your question as you're asking it.
No, you're answering it, and actually it is a mechanical question. My fear would be sometimes as things go on, if we have old documents left up and we're doing something different in the classroom, that's where we get concerns, I think, from parents for saying, but the document says X, and I feel like I'm experiencing something different in the classroom. So and again, I think we have to fully vet this program during the budget season, but that would be my only concern. And I don't think the answer to that concern is, okay, we don't put anything up, right? So I'm not saying that, but I just think if we're going to put something up, then we also have to know that behind it, we constantly have to be updating it. So parents have the most recent relevant information. Because if we're directing parents there to answer questions, I just want to make sure it's updated.
Yeah, and I share that concern. The one benefit to EduPlanet in that respect over Google is EduPlanet, everything lives in one place. And if I worked for Google, I'd say, but everything lives in one place in Google too. But as you know, Google has lots of different owners, how you create folders. All of that is really based on, it takes one person to change a naming convention or a filing convention in a Google document to really create a ripple effect on access for everyone. So if we have let's say a 3rd grade teacher who pretty much was the leader of science curriculum, and then they go to another district or choose or move on in whatever they choose to do or retire, if that wasn't filed the right way, all of that becomes not lost, but it becomes a big project for technology people to go through archives and find where are these who has them, and anyone else that had access to them, it becomes a dead link. That's a huge frustration with Google when you are using it for curriculum purposes.
That's interesting.
No, I mean, the mechanics definitely are operational and I trust you guys to figure out. My only, I guess what I'd say is whatever we do, wherever we end up, would like the end goal to be, if we're directing people to the website or sorry, thank you. That it is the most recent, most updated information. So when we as a board direct them there, we know we're giving them relevant information. I'll leave it to you guys to figure out how to do that. But that's what I would like to ensure.
And I would like to ensure that when parents look at curriculum, no matter what grade level, what content area, it looks the same. They have an understanding of what it means to look at a unit, not that, okay, it looks like this for science, but we do it this way in third grade, and in fourth grade, this is called this. The language, the importance and clarity of language of curriculum it's foundational, and this really helps solidify that.
I got some point. Dr. Adler has something.
Yeah, no, I just, that level of consistency, and it's much less likely for disconnects to occur with this particular scenario. Chris, can I just ask you just to frame given what we see here, like what parents would say, could you just give a wee just idea of, is the board, when it looks at a piece of curriculum, you know, from skills, concepts, knowledge, are they going to, is it much the same, or is it more of that, less? I just to give them a wee concept of like, oh, when a board sees a viable curriculum guaranteed experiences, is it the same as what the parents are seeing, or there's a bit more detail behind it when they approve a curriculum or otherwise? Just to give a wee sense.
I would say it's this is the level of detail with an explanation of what some of those learning experiences are, would be that additional information that the curriculum committee or the full board would have when they're approving. And obviously when it's something like new reading units of study or math and focus, there's a great deal of digging through and flipping through and understanding what those resources are. But on the surface, this would be the gateway into the rest of the unit.
Mrs. Worm.
I'm just curious, have you gotten feedback from the teachers about this yet? And what's their feeling?
As of right now, I've looked at it with department chairs, and currently department chairs are working with a teacher in their department to do like a sample unit to go through that process. Some have started that, some have not yet. But
Okay, so we don't have any idea of how they're feeling about it.
No,
I'm just
but-
wondering if, it looks, I'm not a Google fan, so it looks fantastic to me. I'm just curious about how the teachers feel about it, if it's going to be overwhelming, and, that sort of situation.
by the time we get to the budget, I'll certainly have more information. But I will share that right now, anything for most of us in education that's new and different is going to feel slightly overwhelming.
Yes.
So I will put that out there.
I think that's a fair point.
That's a good point. That's
Go ahead,
life.
Teresa.
Yes, that's true.
I actually had a question back on curriculum drivers. So if you wanted to ask about EduPlanet or say something on that.
Just real quick, and Chris, you may be getting to this, but one of the things we heard through a lot of feedback at the board meetings was the whole concept of the syllabus. This seems to play almost into building the syllabus, and syllabuses can be different for elementary, middle school, high school, but is there a component that helps kind of level set a syllabus? Because I think while this has great detail, and I think a lot of people would be into this, there are other people that just want more of a simple syllabus to understand kind of what the year or the semester looks like.
So I would say that syllabus is the next, if you're creating a funnel, the written curriculum itself is the opening of the funnel. And the next level, you might go down, and the syllabi exist mostly at the secondary level when you have a content specific course. So all of the information you would need to create it is certainly here. It would be something I would need to work with the administration on, just number one, to understand all of the history of where are syllabi, who has them, who doesn't have them, and making sure all of the practices are in place if that was a desire and a place we wanted to go. It sounds like a simple thing that's actually much more complicated than it sounds.
Yeah. Thank you. Ms. Best.
Excuse me, if I can go back to curriculum drivers for 1 second. I was just curious, there are 3 items here, standards and frameworks, and then vision of the graduate and the strategic plan, and those 2 obviously are new. So I think it'd be helpful to understand what were the drivers before those, or how much of a change does this represent that we're now using our new work, the vision of the graduate and the strategic plan as our curriculum drivers?
So if I was propositioned with creating a graphic before the strategic plan and the vision of the graduate existed, you'd still have the standards and frameworks as the primary driver, but then I would think the other piece that you have would be perhaps just the board goals as the single driver. And board goals are obviously still a driver, but they're also so connected to the strategic plan. I don't know if they're necessarily a totally separate one.
So still pretty similar.
Still pretty
It's-
similar. Yes, it's not a new conceptual framework of how curriculum is generated.
Perfect.
Chris, could I add that a part of it may well be, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. This is the curriculum, right? Some of the, for instance, if you take a strategic plan, you're talking about teaching and learning principles. Those teaching and learning principles are more of the instructional. How do you take the curriculum, right? The written curriculum, and how do you deliver it? Because that could be different in your class and your class and my class, right? So they provide some guaranteed experiences in addition to the guaranteed curriculum, right? In terms of delivery models. So just that's one sort of aspect of it.
So the other thing I would just add from a longevity standpoint is that I think a lot of the things in the strategic plan were things that we were doing that we hadn't captured anywhere. And what we were doing was capturing them and deciding how to move forward. So a lot of these things I think will align and are how we were viewing curriculum. And now what were we doing? But we actually hadn't codified it. And I think that was a big driver for strategic plan. Where are we now? Where are we going? What's the roadmap? So some of the concepts really aren't so new. They're just actually codified somewhere different than the annual goals, which if you go back annually, were very similar often because it was always kind of moving curriculum forward.
Perfect. Any further questions? No? All right, I think we are moving on to public comment. Michelle.
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. When the facilitator identifies you, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment.
Anybody in the audience? No?
There are no raised hands at this time.
All right, thank you, everybody. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Warren?